Another crisis for the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, as Europe's medical body says, it's likely linked to potentially deadly, albeit rare blood clots.
After extensive discussions within the committee and taking into account the findings of the expert group, our conclusion is that these clotting disorders are very rare side effects of the vaccine.
Experts have been worrying that the string of bad press and now safety fears are putting people off getting the potentially life-saving drug. But the European regulator also repeated what the World Health Organization and many other health bodies have been saying, that the AstraZeneca vaccine is safe and effective, and that the protection it offers against COVID-19 outweighs the risks. The AstraZeneca vaccine was heralded as a vaccine for the world when it was approved for use first in the United Kingdom on the 30th of December. It is inexpensive and could be stored in normal fridges, unlike other vaccines. But the vaccine has been marred in controversies. This is Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your host, Suhail Akram. In this edition, we're delving into the benefits and the risks of the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine. Before we start, please subscribe to Beyond the Headlines to get the latest episodes on your favorite podcasting app. The vaccine has faced questions about its efficacy, production problems, issues over its data, and now potentially lethal blood clot risks. So, is it safe?
It is a great question, and it is an absolutely perfect question for this topic. And the answer is yes.
This was Dr. Jeremy Rossman, Honorary Senior Lecturer in Virology at the University of Kent. He and Dr. Eric Ding, an epidemiologist, health economist, and a senior fellow at the Federation of American Scientists, both said that despite the warning from the European Union regulator, the AstraZeneca vaccine is safe. Both of them said they would be happy to get the drug. So let's explore what has gone wrong and see why our two experts still think that the vaccine is safe. To understand this vaccine better, let's start from scratch. The AstraZeneca vaccine was developed by a team from Oxford University and the British-Swedish pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca. And what is it? Here's Dr. Rossman.
AstraZeneca vaccine is what we call a viral vector vaccine. And that means we take a virus that makes, for instance, the common cold, and we put a little bit of COVID-19 in that virus. And then we make it so that virus doesn't grow anymore, but it will still infect cells. And so what we do is we use this virus to basically deliver a tiny little bit of COVID-19 to your cells. And then your cells make this little bit of the virus. You build an immune response to it in a very safe way. And that allows protection if you ever get infected again. This is basically a way of delivering a tiny little bit of COVID to your body without you having to get the virus.
The vaccine has been widely praised for being inexpensive and because it can be kept in a normal fridge. This appeals to health experts because the vaccine can be easily transported to some of the world's most remote areas without a need for any expensive sub-zero storage, making it much easier to distribute. Contrast this with Pfizer that has to be kept at minus 70 degrees Celsius, colder than an Arctic winter, or the Moderna vaccine that has to be kept at around minus 20 degrees Celsius. So far, millions of people have taken the AstraZeneca jab across the world. In India, the AstraZeneca vaccine is called Covishield and is manufactured locally by the Serum Institute of India, the world's largest vaccine manufacturer. The firm is producing more than 50 million doses a month, not only for use in India, but also in different parts of the world. Experts say that all the current approved vaccines come with some side effects. Doctors are looking to see if they are worse with people who already had COVID-19, but generally these are between mild and moderate. Dubai resident Suman Manning is one of the many who took the AstraZeneca jab.
So I just felt a bit fluey for literally that one day, the day after the jab. And I woke up feeling fine the day after. My arm was a bit sore, but I think that was to be expected from a intramuscular injection. But apart from the sore arm, I felt fine.
Like Suman, there are millions of others who are feeling perfectly fine after taking the AstraZeneca jab. But the company first ran into trouble in November 2020 when it announced the initial results of its phase 3 clinical trial, that is the final large-scale test before a vaccine can get approval for mass use. The study found the AstraZeneca vaccine to be safe and effective. But soon there was confusion over its efficacy rates and how it was presented to the public. It appeared that AstraZeneca combined data from trials conducted with different benchmarks, potentially confusing the results. So here's what happened. The manufacturers of the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine first said that its phase 3 clinical trial showed the vaccine to be 70% effective. That number soon came under a scanner, as the company had combined the analysis of two separate dosing protocols within the trials. One dosing protocol showed an effectiveness of 90% when trial participants received a half dose, followed by a full dose at least 1 month apart. The other showed 62% efficacy when 2 full doses were given at least 1 month apart. What critics called an error, AstraZeneca framed the reason for the half dose as serendipity. But that was just the start of the trouble. In mid-March, AstraZeneca released interim results from the phase 3 trial conducted in the United States that showed efficacy of 79% at preventing symptomatic COVID-19. But that assurance didn't last long. Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the US National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, said the AstraZeneca had included outdated information from that trial, which may have provided an incomplete view of the efficacy data. AstraZeneca then updated the efficacy results of its coronavirus vaccine trial in the United States and has since reduced the efficacy rate of its vaccine from 79% to 76%. But by the time they set the numbers straight, it had already dented the vaccine's reputation. Here is Dr. Jeremy again.
Part of this problem stems from the fact that we've had a lot of miscommunications about the AstraZeneca vaccine over a long period of time here. And part of that is coming from AstraZeneca, and part of that is due to other governments and how they're responding and reading and interpreting the data. So, for instance, AstraZeneca had an issue with dosing at the very beginning of their clinical trials, and that wasn't communicated very well by the vaccine manufacturers. So that caused a problem. But then the AstraZeneca clinical trials weren't really designed to look at how effective the vaccine was in the over 65 crowd. And that was misinterpreted by some governments as saying that the vaccine doesn't work in those age groups, which is just a poor understanding of the data. So it's been a little bit of multiple different things. And I think part of that stems from the fact that AstraZeneca was one of the first vaccines that really started to be widely used. And so it had all of these problems because it was really paving the road.
The dust has now settled over AstraZeneca's efficacy rates of 76%, which is pretty good, alongside 94 and 95% for Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines. To put this in context, the US Food and Drug Administration and the European Medicines Agency have both kept 50% efficacy rate as the green light for a COVID-19 vaccine. But AstraZeneca's woes didn't stop there. Then came the worry about the link between the AstraZeneca vaccine and blood clots. On the 7th of April, the European Union's medicines regulator said unusual blood clots should be listed as a very rare side effect of the AstraZeneca vaccine for COVID-19 and concluded the benefits of the vaccine outweighed the risk. But the alarm bells had started ringing in March when news started pouring in about deaths related to AstraZeneca. In the UK, out of the 18 million people who had received the vaccine, by early April, 30 people have developed these extremely rare clots after taking the AstraZeneca jabs, and 7 have died. 4 people had died in France after suffering blood clots in the weeks after getting an AstraZeneca vaccine shot. There have been deaths reported in Norway, Denmark, and Austria as experts investigate linkages between this vaccine and blood clots. So, what are these blood clots? They are called cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, or CVST, a rare blood vessel clot that can cause bleeding in the brain. Dr. Jeremy says that all the COVID-19 vaccines ultimately work towards making a little bit of that spike protein of the virus so that the body can make antibodies. But it's not clear yet, or very early to say, how one vaccine's side effects would be different from another. It's also intriguing for scientists that while there are reported cases of blood clots in parts of Europe, in India, where millions have been inoculated with Covishield, the Indian name for AstraZeneca, there have been no reported cases of blood clotting so far. Here's Dr. Jeremy again.
So we have known for a while now that the COVID virus itself causes a lot of clotting disorders. So this is something that seems to be, there are other viruses that do affect clotting, but not typically seen in a lot of respiratory viruses. So this is something that COVID is being a little bit unique on. And so it's interesting that we are also seeing that in the COVID vaccine potentially. Now, in theory, the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are all working on your cells making a tiny little bit of the spike protein, one protein from the virus. And in theory, all the vaccines are making the same protein. So why you would see something different with one vaccine than the other isn't completely clear. So there's a lot of mysteries here. But when we look at the data for Pfizer, we don't see an increase in this specific cerebral clotting disorder. And again, it might not actually be associated with it. We don't know yet. But it's not something that we're seeing across the board with vaccines. And it's not that we're seeing an increased rate of clotting disorders across the population as a whole. It's this very specific one, because clotting disorders as a whole, we actually see lower rates in people that were vaccinated than we would expect to see in the general population. But with this very specific clotting disorder, we actually saw higher rates in people that were recently vaccinated with AstraZeneca.
By mid-March, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain became the latest countries to briefly suspend the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine, even as a third wave of pandemic threatens the continent. But most countries have since resumed AstraZeneca immunization, with Canada, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands stopping its use in people aged under 55. We spoke to Dr. Eric Ding, an epidemiologist, health economist, and a senior fellow at the Federation of American Scientists. He elaborates.
It's not for certain yet, because there is conflicting evidence. If it's truly the AstraZeneca vaccine causing havoc, you should be able to see it in countless countries that have used AstraZeneca, right? India uses AstraZeneca a lot. Many other countries use it. And so, you can't just say if you see it in one country that it's real. It could just be greater surveillance, greater medical monitoring. And also, you have to think about it in terms of risk benefit. It's one thing if you don't know what the benefit is, but you were concerned about the risk. But we do know that there's a huge benefit. It's a large, known, proven, established benefit for a pandemic, for a virus that's not rare. The virus is common. It's everywhere right now. And there's thousands of people are dying. And it's global. And so in that context of a high-risk pandemic that is circulating everywhere, and for the known proven benefit, we can't discount that from the risk calculation, that the risk-benefit ratio clearly leans on the side of large, important benefit. And someone, I think, calculated that for every 100,000 vaccines delayed per day, 15 people will die. And I think it's in the general ballpark of possibility. And again, we don't even know if the risk of the clotting is definitively proven or real. So in that kind of sense, I think the risk-benefit calculation is by far leaning towards you should take the vaccine.
The European Medicines Agency says most of the cases of blood clots reported have occurred in women under 60 within 2 weeks of vaccination. But based on the currently available evidence, it was not able to identify specific risk factors. Dr. Jeremy says we have to be careful in deriving any conclusions straight away.
This is a little bit of sort of hype and concern, both mixed together at the same time. Because the issue is that we have seen an increase in the number of a very specific type of clotting disorder in people that recently had the AstraZeneca vaccine in some countries in Europe. But vaccines are being used in the population. And so something that happens to people in the background, something that might have happened to people anyways, it's very difficult to say, did that occur because of the vaccine? Or was that going to occur to the person anyways? And that can take a long time to tease out the difference between. Now, we really need to pay attention to the safety data as we're using the vaccines more and more, but we need to do this scientifically. And so the issue is that we've seen, I think it's been about 30 cases of this type of clotting disorder in about 20 million doses of the vaccine. So first of all, it's extraordinarily rare. Second of all, we do not know yet if it's correlated with the vaccine or just happened to occur in this cluster. So there's a lot more that we need to know. There's a cause for being cautious, for making sure that we get the data, but this is really rare and we don't know it's linked to the vaccine.
Experts like Dr. Eric worry that these disruptions in AstraZeneca's rollout could prove damaging as the world fights to curb the pandemic.
My worry is that AstraZeneca vaccine uptake will be severely hurt. And if anything, the AstraZeneca vaccine, I would say, is the most important vaccine for the world because it doesn't require freezing like the Moderna and the Pfizer one does. It's simple, and it's much more inexpensive than, say, the Johnson & Johnson and the other vaccines. They're all priced, over $10. The AstraZeneca is only $4 to $5 to $6. And I think this is the vaccine that will really help the world. And so it's so unfortunate that the most critical vaccine, the one that's also the most common in COVAX, AstraZeneca vaccine, is the one that is having all these problems because it's effective. It's especially for severe disease, it's near 100% against severe disease. And people shouldn't discount how critical this is in saving people's lives. And the more we delay using it or are hesitant about using it, the more, endangers the public and prolongs the pandemic and just hurts everything. So I think the public perception should be that AstraZeneca is the most important vaccine for the world, and we should encourage using it, not worry about every small thing, because the risks are not proven definitively yet.
The question of how to balance benefits and risks of AstraZeneca has split governments and health experts across the world, and it comes at a time when the COVID-19 infections have once again risen. The virus is still spreading and creating new variants, and it will take a long time before most of the world is vaccinated. The AstraZeneca vaccine, with its promises of easy storage and being inexpensive, could turn out to be the world's backbone in vaccination. But can its manufacturer turn around months of bad PR? Here's Dr. Eric on what AstraZeneca could do.
I think AstraZeneca should report more of their real-world results in which it clearly shows the benefits. I think it needs to tout that in the trials, we had incredible success in preventing mortality. I think all these things are just so critical that, hey, this is how many people are dying. This is how many people are infected. And you have to show the comparison, this risk-benefit comparison, that first of all, this risk is not even proven, but the benefit is proven and it's huge. It's incredibly large. And if you want to protect your family, the key is to get the vaccine so that we can slow and stop the transmission. And that kind of thing is something that the AstraZeneca could really do. And hopefully, FDA approval in the coming weeks and months will also show that the AstraZeneca is really safe. And I'm hopeful that it will have a rebound in the near future once people realize how important it is. And most of the developing world has not gotten vaccines yet. Many countries have not even gotten vaccines for the entire healthcare worker population. Mexico has not vaccinated all its healthcare workers yet, and that's incredibly unfortunate. So having this vaccine right now is just so critical for the world.
So we asked our two experts if they would themselves take the AstraZeneca vaccine if given a choice. Here's what they said. First, Dr. Jeremy.
And the answer is yes. And for two reasons. One is because I am very worried about COVID. I'm still very worried about COVID. I'm worried about COVID for my health and for where the world is going. And so I want to protect my health, and I want to really do my part to stop transmission. And I know that the data, and I know that even if there is this association with this clotting disorder, it is extraordinarily rare. And we know that there is that potential right now. So they do know what to look for. And by knowing what to look for, there's a possibility of treating it. So I balance the risks, and I say the risks of the vaccine for me and my personal decision, the risks of the vaccine for me is far, far lower than the risks of the virus.
And here's what Dr. Eric had to say.
Yeah, absolutely. The AstraZeneca vaccine isn't available in the United States yet. Not because it wasn't disproven or anything like that. It's just they never submitted it after some tensions with the Trump administration last year. But absolutely, I would take any vaccine offered. In certain ways, I think there's too much over shopping for different vaccines. Oh, which one do you have? I like this one more. It becomes now like, who has which brand name of jeans or shirt. And I think that's very harmful because they all work for serious diseases. For milder illness, some work better, but for a serious disease, which most of the time, that's what actually we care about the most. And that's what's the most important. And these vaccines, again, save lives. If I'm in any country that had any vaccine, I would take the first one that's available. Because in many ways, if you're waiting an extra week or 2 weeks for the one that you want, that could actually hurt the pandemic further by delaying it. And I think playing, vanity over which vaccines you have, I think it's a very dangerous game. And I've heard many stories of people refusing the AstraZeneca vaccine so that they could wait in line for another month or two for the Pfizer in parts of Europe. And I think that's very, very unfortunate. And that kind of, cherry picking and nitpicking over which vaccine you have is actually going to hurt us in the long run.
Thanks this week to Dr. Jeremy Rossman and Dr. Eric Ding. And thanks also to Suman Manning. This week's episode was produced by Arthur Edison, Aisha Khan, Erika Al-Khershi, and James Haynes Young. If you like this episode of Beyond the Headlines, please subscribe and leave us a review. I have been your host, Suhail Akram.